I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins in Washington. In Minnesota, a massive fraud scandal is gaining national attention. Federal prosecutors say at least $1 billion in taxpayer funds, money intended to feed children during the pandemic, was stolen in a widespread scheme. A $1 billion fraud scandal is shaking Minnesota politics and putting Governor Tim Walz on defense.
Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail.
Prosecutors say over $1 billion in taxpayer funds was stolen. Money meant to feed children, house the homeless, and treat those with autism. Those convicted so far are mostly members of Minnesota's Somali community, accused of billing the state for services that never existed. President Trump slamming Governor Walz for allowing this rampant fraud to happen on his watch.
I think there's something wrong with him. Anybody that would do what he did, anybody that would allow those people into his state and pay billions of dollars out to Somalia. We give billions of dollars to Somalia.
I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals.
The first fraud charges came in 2022 against Feeding Our Future, accused of using taxpayer money for luxury cars and real estate instead of food for kids. But state officials had raised red flags 2 years earlier, questioning suspicious invoices. The New York Times reports the group pushed back, warning the state that delaying approval for minority-owned businesses would lead to a racism lawsuit. A later state audit found some officials were hesitant to crack down, fearing racism accusations in the post-George Floyd climate. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer is now calling on the Justice Department to investigate reports that money stolen from Minnesota through these fraud schemes may have been funneled into the hands of Al-Shabaab, a Somali-based terror group. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
I'm Matt Gelka in Washington, where the president went on a disparaging rant against the Somali community in Minnesota this week as the state prepares for a new ICE crackdown. Immigration and Customs Enforcement launched an operation reportedly targeting Somali nationals in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region of Minnesota Wednesday. The new enforcement coming after the president ripped into the Somali community.
I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks. And we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too.
Minnesota is home to the largest Somali community in the country, and the Trump administration is investigating a $1 billion fraud claim in the state where public assistance tax dollars have allegedly been funneled to terrorist organizations based in Somalia. Trump targeted Somali-American Congresswoman Ilhan Omar in his rant.
We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage.
He's always been a racist, a bigot, a xenophobic, and Islamophobic.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he welcomes the investigation into the potential fraud from his state, but slammed the targeting of one community.
My message is simple on this. You commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to prison. I don't care what color you are, what religion you are. Sitting on the sidelines and throwing out accusations, and let's be very clear, demonizing an entire population and lying to people about the safety and security of this state is beneath that.
Republicans have increasingly blamed Walz for the fraud scandal.
Tim Walz refuses to take accountability for the fraud he created and enabled. President Trump is committed to justice for the crimes against the taxpayers of Minnesota.
Critics say the ICE crackdown on the Somali community is a waste of time and money because the overwhelming majority of Somalis living in Minnesota are naturalized U.S. citizens, according to census data. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka.
I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins in Washington. Federal prosecutors say Minnesota is grappling with one of the biggest welfare fraud waves in U.S. history, and now counterterrorism officials warn some of that money is likely ending up in the pockets of Al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda-linked terror group operating out of Somalia. Is the biggest funder of Al-Shabaab, the al-Qaeda-linked terror group in Somalia, actually the Minnesota taxpayer? A federal investigator says yes. An alarming claim first reported by City Journal, which spoke with multiple former federal agents. The U.S. Attorney's Office has charged dozens of defendants across multiple schemes, including housing aid fraud, pandemic child nutrition fraud, and false billing for autism therapy. In total, prosecutors say these schemes have cost Minnesota taxpayers billions of dollars.
Still, there are people that have legitimately could use those resources that are not getting those resources. It's past criminal.
Minnesota is home to one of the country's largest Somali communities. Former state fraud investigator Keish Magan, himself a Somali American, wrote last year that it's uncomfortable and true that nearly all defendants in these major fraud cases come from that community.
They have taken advantage of the most generous country in the world and one of the most generous states in that country.
And according to City Journal, some of the stolen money was sent overseas through informal cash transfer networks. Investigators say once that cash arrived in Somalia, al-Shabaab took a cut, whether the sender intended that or not.
Pretty much across the board, people that I spoke to said there really isn't a law enforcement solution to this problem. As you said, that's simply playing whack-a-mole. People pretty consistently told me that, there needs to be a policy change here.
Critics claim Minnesota leaders have tiptoed around the issue, fearing a backlash from the state's powerful Somali American voting bloc. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
I'm Christine Frizzau in Washington, where lawmakers on Capitol Hill say they want more information about years of fraud being committed by Minnesota residents, the vast majority Somali Americans. The investigations have gotten the attention and the ire of the president. The Somali community in Minnesota, top of mind in recent days for President Donald Trump.
These Somalians have taken billions of dollars out of our country. They've taken billions and billions of dollars.
The president appearing to refer to recent investigations showing widespread fraud in Minnesota. The majority of those charged, members of the Somali community, including the case of Feeding Our Future, a false charity said to be providing meals given $250 million under the federal child nutrition program.
Hundreds of millions of dollars were diverted, again, by several dozen Somali nationals who took the money they were supposed to be using to feed children and, in fact, were pocketing for criminal instances.
There are more examples, not only of fraud perpetrated by those in the Somali community, most of whom are U.S. citizens, but of a concerted effort by government officials to cover it up.
The corruption went on and on and on for years because there was this climate of fear of wanting to raise these issues. They're concerned about, maybe being called racist or bigoted.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer sending letters to Minnesota's governor and attorney general, seeking information about why state regulators were reluctant to take action in response to allegations involving the Somali community, and related to accusations the Department of Human Services deleted data to cover up the rampant fraud. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who is herself Somali American and represents the region in Congress, was asked how the fraud got so out of control.
I just think that a lot of the COVID programs that were set up, they were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created.
Federal prosecutors have already said more indictments in these Minnesota cases are coming. It will be front and center on Capitol Hill and in Minnesota, where Governor Tim Walz is running for a third term. I'm Christine Frizzau for the National News Desk.
See a huge focus on bringing negativity to the Somali community and connecting them to the Feeding Our Future scandal. But what we have to remember is, number one, that was a very, very, very small group of individuals involved in that fraud. They're being held accountable under the law. Many, if not all of them, will face time in prison. But the face of that scandal was actually a white woman named Amy Bach. So I'm going to say the quiet part out loud today. That particular person is who gave access for the scandal to happen in the first place. And yet the focus is on Somali individuals. If it weren't for a white woman opening the door, none of it would have even happened in the first place. So let's be honest here. But we don't hear Donald Trump and ICE and their minions calling out white people who engage in fraud or crime or abuse. And I'm from a community that has unfortunately been impacted as a result of white people's crimes against black people that have gone unrecognized, that have never been addressed, and where we continue to be mistreated and stereotyped, even though our community for decades upon decades have been the ones who have suffered as a result of white privilege, white power, and white supremacy.
He's wrong, and we want them here. Somali people have been an extraordinary benefit. I'll say it again. Somali people have been a benefit to our city for longer than I have been in our city. They have started businesses and created jobs. They have added to the cultural fabric of what Minneapolis is. They were welcoming to me when I first came out to Minneapolis. In fact, they were one of the first groups that I myself got to know. To, again, villainize an entire group is ridiculous under any circumstances. And the way that Donald Trump is consistently doing it, I think calls into question major constitutional violations. And it certainly violates the moral fabric of what we stand by in this country as Americans.
Washington looking into the rampant state fraud in Minnesota that's already led to dozens of indictments. The U.S. House Oversight Committee and the Treasury Department both launched investigations into the massive fraud scheme lawmakers say used taxpayer dollars to fund terror groups overseas. Oversight Committee Chair James Comer said Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was warned about massive fraud in a pandemic food aid program for children, yet he failed to act. Instead, whistleblowers who raised concerns faced retaliation. Because of Governor Walz's negligence, criminals, including Somali terrorists, stole nearly $1 billion from the program while children suffered. And one of the journalists who uncovered the scandal says the massive operation was extensive and expanded over many years.
It's not just a single billion, but sources in Minnesota tell me it's multiple billions of dollars that have been stolen by Somali migrants, predominantly in Minneapolis. They were doing things like faking autism diagnoses, faking autism treatment plans, opening up fraudulent autism centers, and then bilking hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers. This is the biggest systematic fraud scandal, and it's not just a few isolated individuals. I think we're looking at hundreds of Somali families and really widespread recognition within the Somali community.
Developing this morning, the Department of Homeland Security linking multiple Democratic lawmakers in Minnesota to an illegal Somali national arrested as part of the immigration crackdown there. Abdul Dahir Ibrahim entered the U.S. in 1995 after being deported from Canada, where he was charged with welfare and asylum fraud. He had been living in Minnesota despite an order by an immigration judge for his removal back in 2004 because of his extensive history of fraud charges. He was finally arrested by ICE agents last week. DHS did post these pictures online of Ibrahim with multiple Democrats they say have allowed him to keep living in the U.S. under sanctuary policies, including failed Minneapolis mayoral candidate Omar Fattah, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and Governor Tim Walz. At the same time, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is threatening to cut off funding to Minnesota over concerns of fraud in the state.
It's true. A Somali fraud ring in Minnesota stole over $1 billion from Medicaid. How did this happen? Well, Medicaid programs are run by the states, which in Minnesota means the Tim Walz administration. Governor Walz and the state's other Democrats rely on Somali votes to get elected, so they decided to look the other way because they were afraid of, quote-unquote, political backlash. Our message to Walz is clear. Either fix this in 60 days or start looking under your couch for spare change, because we are done footing the bill for your incompetence.
Governor Walz is also under investigation by the House Oversight Committee. Last week, Chair James Comer gave him a December 17th deadline to provide documents and records related to the investigation.